Welcome to another installment of the Soil Health video series brought to you by Cargill Region Connect and American Farmland Trust. This episode, Cover Crops Part 1, Selection and Application, features a discussion with industry experts in which we ask them some of the most popular questions about cover crops. Providing insights and advice are Gary Leswing, University of Nebraska Extension Cropping Systems Educator, TJ Kartz, Saddle Butte Ag Regional Sales Manager, Stephanie McLean, NRCS State Soil Health Specialist, Anna Morrow, Midwest Cover Crops Council Senior Program Manager, Dale Strickler, Green Cover Seed Sales Agronomist, and Anna Teeter, Cargill Conservation Agronomist. Also hear firsthand experiences from our soil health farmers. If you haven't already been watching our soil health series, be sure to check out the other videos to learn more about the participating farmers and their operations. Let's start with some of the benefits of cover crops. Could we go around the virtual table that we have here and hear from each one of our experts on what they see as some of those really beneficial factors of incorporating cover crops into our management systems?
When we talk about cover crops, I really like to think about history first, and they claim a lot of great civilizations collapse because they don't take care of their soils and they don't have the ability to feed themselves anymore. And I believe that cover crops and most soil health practices help to keep and maintain our soils so that we can continue to be a productive society and produce food, fuel, and fiber for everyone. And I think that cover crops and soil health practices are one of the best ways to do that.
Cover crops is a great way to keep your soil armored and protected after and before the growing season, where we have anywhere from 20 to 60 to 80 days with the growing season that we're not utilizing. We can control erosion, we can get water infiltration, we can increase organic matter, we can give a lot of benefits that cover crops can give you that you're not getting from a cash crop and you don't get from ever doing tillage.
In 2019, we had the bomb cyclone, and like third of Nebraska was underwater. And just seeing some of the ground, the soil and fields that were under cover crops that didn't erode, that was a tremendous testament to the benefit of cover crops there. Aside from erosion, I always look at, there's at least four ways: erosion, soil health aspect of it, some of the same things that TJ said, but then also weed control or some suppression of weeds, especially winter annuals, and even Palmer amaranth. There's some benefits there they're seeing. And then finally, the kind of added bonuses of forage, and cattle can graze them in Nebraska, where we have a lot of livestock. It's a real benefit.
How do farmers make that decision of what cover crop to use, or maybe what cover crop mix to consider, and where or how to incorporate it into their management system?
Well, when we talk about cover crops, the most basic way to think about it is that you're putting a plant out there to protect your soil during the time of year when you're not growing your cash crop. And as we start to break them down into different types of categories, we want to think about our grasses, which is, our small grains and our other grass cover crop species. And then we're going to have our broadleaves, which pretty much encompasses everything else out there. And then we take those broadleaves and we kind of break them down into different categories beyond that, from looking at our brassicas, which is a specific type of broadleaf that is from the brassica family. So our radishes, our rapeseed, and our turnips. Another important category is our legumes. So those are broadleaves that actually will fix nitrogen. So they're taking nitrogen from the atmosphere, and the magical little root nodule that the plant has on its root, there's a process going on where the rhizobium bacteria will take that nitrogen from the atmosphere and turn it into a plant available form. Some of our other broadleaves can be considered just general broadleaves, but usually have multiple benefits for our beneficial insects and pollinators. There's so many different categories when we start to break our cover crops down and just think about all the various different cover crop plants there are.
Anna, can you give us a brief run through of the cover crop selector tool that Midwest Cover Crop Councils offers?
The Midwest Cover Crops Council has a cover crop selector tool. And we put a lot of work into this, making it customized to your county. So in the background of the tool, we've got 30 years of climate data that give you a customized growing season for your county and your state. So you can bounce around across different states and different geographies and look at how the growing season changes. And that's all based on frost dates, because we're looking at the very edges of the growing season when we're talking about cover crops. We want to make sure we've got good information for you. So we ask you to put in your state and county to start with, because that's going to affect your growing season. And then you can look at cover crops from there. So that's the minimum input for our tool. And that'll show you different reliable establishment dates for a whole list of cover crops. If you want to go deeper than that, and I suggest you do, you can input up to 3 goals. So if you want to scavenge nitrogen, prevent erosion, maybe graze, whatever your goals are, you can put in 3. Then the tool will sort out the cover crops based on your goals. We've also got a spot where you can put in your cash crop. And that's just a reminder that, hey, you've got a cash crop growing in the field from these particular dates, whatever dates you input. So that, if you wanted to plant something during that time, you'd have to be creative. Beyond that, we ask about your soil drainage and potential flooding, because those can be some real limiting factors when we're talking about cover crops. If you've got a real tough spot in terms of drainage or flooding, there's going to be a few options, but we would like to kind of give you a heads up on what cover crops would be more successful. And so that's kind of the brief overview of our cover crop decision tool. I encourage you to check it out.
What should farmers take into consideration when thinking about incorporating cover crop mixes and diversifying? Stephanie, let's start with you.
One of the most important considerations I like to consider when thinking about cover crop diversity or having mixes is thinking about that time of year.
So depending on which crop you are going to be following that cover crop with can largely dictate what your cropping choice is. And there, obviously, if your next crop is a nitrogen demanding crop like corn, you'll want a crop is high in protein, has a lot of nitrogen, or has another way of saying that is low carbon nitrogen ratio residue.
Everyone's talking about the importance of diversity. So all of a sudden our farmer is really wanting to try some diversity out there. And the thing is if we are in a typical corn and soybean rotation with our corn crop growing as long as it does to the end of the growing season, and our soybeans as well, we are really losing a window for trying to add that diversity. And so the first thing that I would want to think about when talking to a farmer about trying to add diversity, those considerations of how are they going to add that diversity? Because if it's the middle to end of October or even into November and we're still harvesting corn, your only option really is cereal rye. I mean, you might have a couple other winter grains, but not very many. And if we are harvesting soybeans, it would be great if we could get our soybeans out by the 15th of September, because then we still have a pretty decent window for adding some different species out there in our cover crop mixes. But if we're getting into the middle of October or later and we're still harvesting soybeans, again, we're losing that window for diversity, and that misconception that if I'm adding diversity, I'm also increasing cost. So I wonder if that's a worthwhile part of this conversation here, to talk about how if we look at a single species, we're just paying that price for that single species. And when we diversify to a mix, even 4 species in some cases, you would take that primary species that you're working with and you would lower that rate down a little bit and then add other species to it, but at smaller rates, and you'd be able to diversify. Many times what we see is that mix that maybe has 4 species is cheaper overall than a single species or a 2 species mix.
Does application method play any role in the selection of cover crops? And if so, how?
As far as application method impact on selection, if and that is huge, because if you start using like bigger legumes like peas or something like that, you're not going to aerial apply peas. it's not going to work. Now you aerial apply cereal rye all day long, but you're not going to aerial apply peas. And even some of the smaller seeds, when you aerial apply them, you end up with some snags here and there. So you gotta really look at how you are applying it, and when it's going to lay there, how long can it lay there before the viability of the seed is gone. So I think that's a big part of what you're going to choose, is how you plan on applying it.
Large seeds do not broadcast. Small seeds broadcast better, because smaller seeds need less seed to soil contact in general. Essentially, things that need good seed to soil contact do not broadcast well. Really, about the only big seeds that do broadcast well, exceptions to that rule, in my experience, are cereal rye and hairy vetch. Those are probably the only two large seeded crops that broadcast well.
If you're applying via airplane or broadcasting, you're going to have to apply a higher rate than you would if you're drilling. You're going to have more success with the seed to soil contact if you're drilling versus something that's going to sit on the soil surface.
I would say in general across the Midwest, we are seeing over time our seeding rates for cover crops are coming down. And I think that's because a lot of our initial experience when people were first getting started with cover crops was with cropping acres. So they were looking at oats as a crop, and a lot of the, canola as a crop, lots of things like that, a lot of the forage species. And so we've brought our cover crop seeding rates down quite a bit.
What factors go into determining the appropriate or effective seeding rates for cover crops?
Most people are going to go down the middle of the road, but there are two things I think that are pretty important when you're considering going to a lower or higher seeding rate. One is the time of year that you're planting. If you're going to get your cover crop established early, you could probably get by with a lower seeding rate and still get significant biomass. If it's late in the year and you have a winter hardy species, you may want to increase your seeding rate just to give a little bit of a biomass bump to that crop. What is your goal for the actual cover crop? I've talked to some people that are just starting to toy with planting green into a real tall cover crop. They don't want a whole lot of biomass. Maybe they don't have, real highly erodible ground. They're just looking to kind of have a little more wiggle room on that cash crop planting date. And so they're going to keep a fairly low seeding rate to keep that biomass down as they plant their cash crop into that in the spring.
This next question, Stephanie, let's start with you. Can you tell us about some innovative application methods that you've heard about that are really exciting?
And there's a lot of other companies that are now putting some type of a seed bin or something like that you can put on your combine. And what all of these seed boxes do is they have the tubes that run out of the seed boxes, and they go underneath the seed head from the back side, or go underneath the combine head. What their purpose is that they're wanting to put the seed right on the ground as the crops are getting harvested, and the seed gets blown onto the ground. A combine drives over top of it, and then a very nice, beautiful mulch gets spread right over the top of that seed, and creating probably the most perfect seed bed possible that you can have, because there's still a little bit of moisture in that soil from that crop that's still there possibly, and then you're putting that seed right out there right away. So I think that's a really innovative seeding method that some people are starting to utilize. Those cover crop interseeder tools have really changed the game in that potential as you head further north into the northern corn belt up into Minnesota and those areas, because it's putting that seed right in the soil, strategically placing it between the corn rows, and it's getting good seed to soil contact. That's a really great tool. Just again, to remember, each season is different. I think that all application methods have their benefits and their pros, and that as we try to be strategic about this process, that we got to try to utilize all of these methods to be fully successful.
What words of wisdom do you have for any of the farmers who may be watching?
As you look at each species, most of them have either a warm or cool season variety to them. And as you're planting, make sure you know which one you're planting and when. As we do mixes, what I really try to start everybody off on is a 101 program. You start out with maybe 2 to 3 to 4, depending on the time of the year and what you're doing. And that way, when you go to the field, you can see these and you understand what each species is giving you.
What's become increasingly popular is just buying whatever your neighbor combined. Sometimes that can be a good option, but usually that seed is coming directly from a bin and it was put directly off the combine into a bin. It's not cleaned, it's not tested, not certified. You definitely run some risks, and you can get a good price. Sometimes you can get seed for half price by that method. So sometimes a bargain is not always a bargain.
Experts such as the industry professionals you just heard from are so valuable in helping make decisions and choosing the right cover crop for your system. Equally as important are other farmers who have successfully integrated cover crops into their own systems. We're going to wrap up this video with their experiences and some advice from them.
Different cover crops that we like to use on our farm is very dependent on the next crop that's going to be grown in that particular field. You know, as an example, ahead of a corn crop, we like to use lots of legumes out there to get the benefit of nitrogen fixation or pulling atmospheric nitrogen in. You know, that helps generate the nitrogen that we need to raise that corn crop, so we can cut down on the commercial fertilizer that we need to apply to get the same benefit of the nitrogen. You know, we learned our lesson with the carbon nitrogen penalty, you know, by using a lot of cereal rye ahead of corn. So if we have cereal rye in our mix, it's a small amount. We do get the benefit. One of the biggest benefits we get from cereal rye as a cover crop is weed suppression. So, you know, ahead of soybeans, we like to use quite a bit of cereal rye, and we've used as much as 100 to 120 pounds of cereal rye per acre to help manage and control weeds, suppress weeds in those fields where we may have some problems. A lot of times we'll include, you know, a second or third species there too. A lot of times we like to use rape, which is a brassica, dwarf Essex rape. Does a real nice job of fracturing compaction and a taproot that really bores deep, and it also scavenges nutrients that are already there and helps make them available for that next season crop. So, you know, it's highly dependent on the next crop that we plan to grow on that farm.
We pretty much use cereal rye, and we vary the rates, application rates of those based off of what our rotation looks like. We have found that decreasing our rates actually gives us a better opportunity to farm in the subsequent year and still get all the benefits of the wind and that green and growing roots. So we've done multi-species, we have done a multitude, we've double drilled.
We started kind of down this regenerative path back in 2014. And originally, you know, we wanted to get started with cover crop. That was the obvious lowest hanging fruit in our opinion. At the time, we were only farming a couple 300 acres, and, you know, the fields were located, you know, near communities and neighborhoods and odd shaped fields, and, you know, trying to figure out how we get this cover crop out there and get it established early, because clearly that was where the benefit was, right? That's what all the research was showing. Thinking, okay, well, there's airplanes around, but trying to get an airplane to come into these areas and cover these 5, 14, 22 acre fields and do it, you know, edge to edge without putting it in the next door neighbor's flower beds, I was concerned about that. And, you know, so we started looking and seeing what other technologies and alternatives were out there. We found a couple guys up in Ada, Ohio that had developed this distribution system to go on a high boy sprayer. We worked with them and hired them to build this machine for us.
That whole termination, that whole rate thing, but we've declined clear down to 30 pounds is where we are, because it stools well enough and it does a remarkable job there, but then it's manageable to farm through. It really is. You can no-till with air seeders and on 7.5 inch spacing right through, you know, 7.5 inch spaced rye, and it does a really and with guidance now, you can darn near plant in between those rows. It's pretty remarkable.
It is critical to pay attention to the chemistry program that you're using on your farm if you intend to use cover crops. On our farm, we have not used any residual herbicide at all since 2016. Okay, so we don't have that worry on our farm, but I know a lot of folks that we consult with and we work with and we do application work for, that is a concern. And I would highly recommend that if you are still using a pretty robust chemistry program on your farm, including residual herbicides, that you talk with your agronomist and you talk with your seed dealer to understand what that chemical carryover, what is the half-life of those chemicals, because that in my opinion, right up there with lack of rain, is the number one reason why we don't have success in cover crop stands.
Because there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, weather, timing, you're going to learn from that one cover crop. And you got to look at your rotations too, and how you can begin to interject a lot of those cover crops and how they'll work and complement your rotations or your practices. When we look at all these different cover crop species, some overwinter, some do not. Some are very deep rooted, some are shallow rooted. They each offer a different benefit. So I think it's just looking to see how we can use each of these in our management system.
We've been able to reduce our input cost on pesticides for sure. We're not using any residual herbicides. Our herbicide use is down because we're able to use some of the cover crops to help and assist in weed suppression. Are my fields perfectly clean? No, but they're within a threshold, a management threshold that makes sense, right? At the end of the day, we're seeing improvement in our soil tests and the nutrient density of the crop that we're producing, the quality of the crop we're producing, and ultimately higher ROI per acre.
Because we have our intensive crop rotations, our water expectations, and then we're in highly erodible ground. We have the Ogallala Aquifer underneath of us, so we have all of these pressures that made you evaluate and look at different ways. Well, rotations are a big deal. We are not a monoculture here. I mean, we're in a 5-year rotation and we plant cover crops. If we can keep it green year round, let's do it.
Don't forget, if you want to keep watching these videos, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Resources you heard about today, including Cargill's Region Connect, American Farmland Trust, NRCS, Midwest Cover Crop Council, and more, can be found in the description for this video. Special thank you to all of the industry professionals who came out today and chatted with us for a while. And we encourage you to watch for the next video where we will hear more from them.
To me, the most exciting thing in cover cropping is what we can accomplish for this planet with just simple plants. We can take carbon dioxide out of the air where it's a problem and put it into soil where it's a benefit. And nobody has the power to do that anymore than farmers.